Hey guys who came in, thanks for joining us today. So we're going to start a new conversation for the next few weeks, a little series that I'm calling Deal With It, because we're going to talk about 5 different D words that are challenges on some level for each of us. So we're going to start today by thinking about the concept of doubt. It's our first D that we're going to talk about today. By the way, I'd be happy to make notes available to you guys if you want to look at some of this stuff again on your own time in the future. But let's kind of start by just throwing out some things that are common sources of doubt for people. So it could be doubts that you yourself have, or doubts that are just kind of a common thing, or and it doesn't even necessarily have to be things that are specific to Christians. Just what are some things that people tend to doubt, or that would cause people to doubt? Maybe give me some interaction on that. What do you guys think of as common sources of doubt? Go ahead, Noah.
Maybe like aliens are real, I guess.
Yeah, right. So things that are like pertaining to the unknown, are the X Files real? Aren't they real? Do you guys know what the X Files are? Probably not. Okay.
No.
Um, old TV show. Yeah, like things that pertain to the supernatural or the extraterrestrial could cause doubt. Okay. What else?
Lack of confidence.
Okay. Doubt is a lack of confidence. Surely. So there's all kinds of things that maybe we could have confidence in. I think this is kind of at the core of what Pastor Phil's talking about on Sunday, that we trust in. And when those things like fail us, then all of a sudden we doubt. Okay. Other things? Any other? Go ahead. Go ahead, Straubs.
When you continually get like bad news and then you're just doubtful about the future.
Yeah, no, that's a great observation. Like when you get hit by multiple occasions of bad news, it just causes you to have either a cynical or fearful perspective of what the future might hold. Yeah, definitely. Okay. Anything else come to mind? Sources of doubt? So a couple ones that just kind of jump out to me. We find ourselves in some unfortunate circumstances right now, right? And one of the, we could generally categorize it as the problem of evil, right? So anything that has to do with death or sickness or injury or loss, disappointment, even, these are all things that can cause people who maybe would claim to be a believer in Christ, or people of faith or religious people, to all of a sudden question whether or not they really believe that God is who he says he is. And cause people who don't have any type of belief at all to say, aha, see, therefore there is no God, there is no reason to believe in anything. So circumstances, problems in our life, COVID-19, right, can test and cause doubt. When it comes to Christianity, I think that Christians really wrestle with the relationship between philosophy, modern science, and the Bible. Trying to understand the relationship between schools of thought that don't necessarily draw from the Bible as their ultimate truth. That can cause doubt in some people. They struggle to see how they can fit together, and that causes them to question. Okay. Maybe you guys identify with this one, but as a Christian, if you struggle with sin, like you just can't kick a habit, something is just constantly coming back in your life, that can cause a lot of doubt. Right? Am I really a follower of Christ? And does the Spirit really dwell within me? Do I really love Jesus? Right? Is God real? Wouldn't God help me with this? Why would God leave me to continue dealing with this issue? Okay, so struggles with sin can be a big source of doubt. If you've ever had, if you've ever dated someone and had that end poorly, or if you had a friend that is no longer your friend based on some circumstances, like broken relationships can cause us to really doubt ourselves. It can cause us to doubt whether, again, God is good, whether God is in the midst of those things. And it can cause us to doubt whether we can really trust people, right? So there's a lot of different things that could cause us to, come to that point of doubt. But let's roll back the conversation a little bit. Let's talk about what doubt actually is. So somebody give me, a definition of doubt, or what you think doubt might be caused by, or things that are connected to that. So let's get more of a full understanding of what this thing is that we're talking about. So when you think of doubt, how would you describe what that is to somebody else?
Non-belief in something or an object.
Non-belief in something or an object. Okay. Very good. Somebody else want to add to that, or offer another thought?
A feeling of uncertainty or a lack of confidence.
Yeah, definitely. A feeling of uncertainty. Sarah, what are you showing me there? The dictionary definition? Feeling of uncertainty or lack of conviction. Okay. Very good. I could have just Googled that myself. Always good to get the one thing that I will always remember. Not my dad's still alive. I'm saying this like he's dead. He's not dead. One thing I always loved about my dad was whenever he was like a walking dictionary. Like if you ever asked my dad what a word meant, he would be able to tell you what it was. Like even the most obscure words that you can possibly think of. But if he didn't know what it was, he would immediately go and get the dictionary and look it up. And he would be like, you could do this. Okay. Well, that's true, Dad, but I could just ask you. So we just ask Siri, Siri tells us everything. Google tells us everything. So any other thoughts on doubt, definition for it, or another thought related to doubt?
When it's self-doubt, I usually think of insecurity, but with others, like a lack of trust.
Yeah, isn't it interesting, Sarah, how those things kind of overlap and relate to one another? Like I wouldn't say, I might say I doubt myself if I'm thinking about like my ability to do something. But if it comes to like somebody else, I might not use the word doubt. I would use the word trust. Like I don't trust that person. They've let me down for whatever reason or something like that. So yeah, these are definitely related ideas. Okay. Any other thoughts? So we use the word uncertainty. That's popped up in both Ty's mouth and the definition on Google. But uncertainty about truth, the reality of so Noah referenced aliens, right? Things that we can't necessarily see or observe with our eyes unless we've been abducted by them. But spiritual things, the intangible things can be cause us some uncertainty because we can't see them. James 1 talks about how the double-minded man, somebody who doesn't know what he believes, is unstable in all his ways. So that communicates that same idea, spiritual instability, or I'm not certain, I'm not confident, I lack faith. And then, the Bible also talks about sort of the presence of fear in the life of a person as a kind of doubt. It sort of puts those two on the same footing. When Jesus is calming the storm, he says, why are you afraid? And really the question is, why are you doubting me? Right? Disciples, you've seen what I'm capable of doing. Why are you doubting my ability to do these things? Okay. Now here's another question for you. And this is something that we can kind of talk about a little bit. What's the difference between, having a moment of doubt, wrestling with doubt about a particular issue, and being somebody who would be a doubter, like somebody like Thomas, okay, that we, unfortunately label him as a doubting Thomas, right? What's the difference between having that be a marker of your identity and being somebody who just occasionally has a struggle with doubt? Any thoughts on that?
Well, one is somebody who is always doubting and doesn't believe in that anyone can do anything pretty much. And one is it's a period of time, a short period of time where you doubt maybe yourself or something else, someone else's ability to do something. So you either doubt all the time or you doubt part of the time.
Yeah, I think you're right, Ty. The length of time is a factor in this. Somebody who is just, this is a season for me, I'm just really struggling to believe right now, is in a totally different place than somebody who's just, everything they do is to cast mistrust or suspicion on other things, right? Constantly doubting other stuff. Okay. Good, good. Other thoughts? Being a doubter versus having doubt or having doubts?
I think having doubts, like what Ty said, like it's natural to have doubts sometimes. Like you shouldn't always just believe everything right away. But I think often, like if you're a doubter, you have a lack of faith in, like spiritually, you'd have a lack of faith in God and who He is.
Yeah, absolutely. But you raise a great point, Sarah, that the Bible actually commands us to have a healthy skepticism when it comes to, beliefs and things that are outside of biblical teaching. So there is a sense in which, the term is test the spirits in 1 John 4, with this idea that we're testing to prove whether or not they're true or false. So, being a person of faith in this context shouldn't be somebody who just accepts everything that they hear, right? That's not necessarily what we're getting at. But we don't want to be the kind of person who doesn't have faith or who isn't able to trust people. Okay. Any other thoughts on this? Being a doubter versus having doubts. By the way, Thomas, again, we call him Doubting Thomas just as a sort of an unfortunate tradition, but he demonstrates quite a bit of belief, doesn't he, in the fact that, when he sees Christ, he's, my Lord and my God, as he confesses Christ at that moment. So, yes, he doubted, but he didn't abandon his faith. He doesn't walk away from Christianity the way a certain Judas does. So, Thomas gets kind of a bad rep, unfortunately, there. But the reality is, we're going to look at a passage today that's also going to talk about sort of the difference between, being in a position where you're willing to place full confidence in the Lord, regardless of what you see in front of you, and somebody who needs proof, who needs verification. And so we all kind of fall in that spectrum somewhere. Somebody who's a doubter, somebody who's really the type of person we want to avoid, it's totally an identity thing with them. It's like for them to be able to embrace something, they've got to see it, they've got to touch it, they've got to be able to hold it in their hands, right? And they're always going to be casting doubt or suspicion on things that they think are unlikely. We, for example, we still struggle with sin as Christians, but like sinner is not our identity anymore. Technically, we still sin. We still have that struggle because we still are in these bodies of flesh, but ultimately our position in Christ is redeemed, sanctified, justified, set apart. Right. And so in the same way, we will still have doubts, but that's not our identity anymore. So maybe some questions we might want to ask ourselves, is just to evaluate, am I characterized by constantly doubting? Am I more full of questions or answers on some of these things that I believe, right, or claim to believe? Are these qualities of who I am? Are they struggles? Am I asking negative or denying questions, or positive searching questions when I am asking questions? Because questions are good things. We want to be able to learn and understand things, but am I asking from a position where I'm sort of presupposing that it's not true, or am I asking from a position where I'm really searching out the answer? What are my expectations when it comes to the desires that I have, the things I want to understand? Am I assuming that God's not even going to answer, right? That could determine whether or not I find myself on one side of the spectrum or another. And so questioning is not necessarily doubting. However, doubting is always questioning, all right? Let me say that again. Questioning is not necessarily doubting, but doubting is always questioning, right? There's a bit of a distinction there. Asking good questions is good, but as someone who's doubting is always going to be asking questions versus coming to an understanding of what the truth actually is. A good example of this, you guys remember in the New Testament when Jesus is talking with the Pharisees, they constantly demand a sign from him. They keep saying, give us a sign that you're the Son of Man. Give us a sign that you're the Messiah, kind of thing. And Jesus like tells them, no, no other sign is going to be given. He says, except for the sign of Jonah, which he references. Jonah went into the fish for 3 days and then he came out, right? In the same way, the Son of Man is going to be in the grave for 3 days. But, the Pharisees were asking not from a position of, hey, Jesus, we're really struggling to believe in you. Could you help us out a little bit, right? No, they're trying to disprove what it is, the claims that he has given, right? And so they're saying, give us a sign, prove yourself, right? So that's a different kind of question than somebody who is like, man, Jesus, I really want to believe. And I feel like I'm almost there, but there's this hurdle that I can't get past. There's this thing that I'm struggling with, right? And so the language of our questions can really reveal what the intent of the question is. Help me believe is a totally different request than prove yourself, right? And that's kind of where the Pharisees were versus where we want to be. So, by the way, I was thinking about, just as a simple point of application, probably a little bit off topic, but I think connecting, this is why when you constantly ask questions of your parents, they get frustrated with you, right? Because it reveals a lack of trust, okay? It sort of implies that you don't trust them, that you don't think they know best when you're constantly asking, well, why are we doing it this way? How come we're not doing it that way? Why is that important to you? Why is this not important to you? The why question, do I really want to know the answer, or do I really just want to figure out how I'm going to get my way out of this? I'm just really communicating to my parents that I don't trust them. So, we do that same thing with God too, though. If we're constantly coming to him, not with God, I really want to understand this, versus God, why is this the way it is? There's a totally different tone to the question. Does that make sense to you guys? As with anything, the way we ask the question is just as important as the words that we use in the question. Okay. Now let me ask you this, and you guys can, chime in. Don't just give me a head nod on this or a head shake on this. Is doubt a sin? All right. Based on what we're talking about, is doubt a sin? I see head shakes, but I want a why. I'm asking you why. Why?
You said that doubting things outside the Bible isn't wrong, but there's a line where we shouldn't doubt too much and we should trust the person or the thing enough. But then there's doubting and unbelief, which unbelief is a sin. So in a way, yes and no.
Yeah. So I think what you're hinting at, Sarah, is there's an object that's in question. What is it that we're doubting? Who is it that we're doubting? Okay. And that might define whether or not that's a sin. Okay. And you said unbelief is a sin, and I would agree with you. Okay. Other thoughts? Is doubt a sin?
Well, I think if you're doubting all the time and you don't really believe anything, then it is a sin. But if you have your moments of doubt, I think that it's not a sin. So as long as you don't doubt everything and like question everything, I think you're good. But you're not good if you do that, sorry. But if you doubt sometimes, like have your moments of doubt, I think that's acceptable.
Okay. All right. Other thoughts, comments?
I think the initial reaction is okay and like almost kind of healthy, but it's what you do, it's what you choose to do with that thought. And if it becomes a pattern, then I don't think it is healthy.
Yeah. Patterns are, they're indicative of something. If we're constantly doing one thing, that becomes a character trait. And so if all I'm doing is doubting, then that's a problem. And maybe this is where the overlap really does come into contact with fear, because fear is also in the same way, when it's a reaction to something that's happening, fear is a basic fight or flight kind of thing. It's, am I going to live through this or am I going to die? And so doubt, and it can function in a similar way. But I think maybe let's specify that when we're talking about doubt in this context, when we're trying to figure out whether or not we are doing the right thing by doubting, we have to come back to, are we, what's going on in our heads and in our hearts, through this? What is it that we are trying to figure out, and how are we going about doing it? So it's kind of a, it's a it's a way of reasoning through the experience or the challenge that we see in front of us, right? Doubt is, it's interesting. There's, some of the historical philosophical methods are based on doubt. Doubt everything until you can prove it. That's the basic idea of skepticism, right? Prove it is essentially the way that a lot of philosophy is built. So, when it's from an attitude of discovery, then maybe it's not necessarily a bad thing, but we also have to be cautious about, in that regard, what is it that we're going to for truth? What is it that we are searching out as a means of identifying what truth is? I don't mean to be too philosophical with this, but doubt is a tool to understand, but it also could be problematic. So we want to make sure that we're doing it the right way, we're engaging the right way. Now, let me ask you this question. So, Ty, you kind of raised the point that, if it's something that happens, occasionally, but it's not like your basic way of operating, or, it's not your character to be doubting, but it's just something that happens, you're okay. Let's think through this a little bit. So if I were in a, conversation with Tara, and for whatever reason, I didn't trust her on something, okay? And we're trying to, working through this issue, and I'm not trusting her. And then it comes, we are able to come to resolution. Would I not still say to something to Tara to the effect of, well, I'm sorry I didn't believe you, right? I'm sorry that I didn't see eye to eye with you on this, right? Or, I'm sorry that I cast doubt on you in some way. Like, I don't know how you guys would necessarily handle some of those kinds of conversations, but I feel like, at least in my view, I would still be apologizing in some way, for not initially trusting. Does that make sense? And so when it comes to my relationship with the Lord, I'm not saying that, we have to unpack this a little bit. I would still, it would be the same thing. Like, Lord, I'm so sorry that I doubted, there would still be an act of contrition. Like, Lord, I'm sorry. I did something wrong by doubting you. So again, this is when it comes to that object of doubt, like Sarah was raising, a minute ago, am I doubting the Lord? Well, then maybe it is a sin, right? Because I'm supposed to place my confidence in him. I'm supposed to place my trust in him. However, the beauty of my relationship with the Lord is that God is merciful and responds with grace to those who ask for help. And so and maybe, I just want to be clear on this. God isn't like, you doubted me, how dare you? I don't think that's God's attitude toward us, because he recognizes that he's asking us to walk by faith. However, when we ask for help, we're still acknowledging, Lord, in my human frailty, I could not understand what you were doing. I did not see you clearly in this. And so I'm still going to ask his forgiveness in that. So there's a bit of a spectrum that we're getting at here, right? On one hand, there's the person who, I'm just really struggling to believe this, Lord, help my unbelief kind of thing, right? And then there's the people that, are sort of actively doubting, where they've progressed down this path for so long where they haven't gotten the answer that they wanted, or they haven't gotten a suitable answer to their question. And now it's like, I just don't know if I can believe this anymore, and then you get to the point where, the facts of the Bible just don't add up. This doesn't make sense anymore. And so there's a spectrum that we would find ourselves on. And I think at any stage of that, the answer is still going to be the same, that when I realize, this is what I should have trusted in all along, or this was the truth all along, there's still going to be a reaction of, Lord, forgive me, right? I didn't believe you the way I should have. Okay. So I'm saying this in a roundabout way to say that I think doubt is a sin, but it's not an unforgivable sin, right? The only way that sin becomes unforgivable is when, I have not placed my faith in Christ. I have the true sin of unbelief, where I've not actually believed in the sanctifying, saving, redeeming work of Jesus Christ. So God is gracious with me in my doubts. But doubt is also, it's complex, because it brings along with it some other sins in my attitude. So for example, just a couple of things, and you might think of your own too, but doubt almost always, when it starts to progress along that spectrum, it often brings along with it an attitude of pride, right? Because as I get further and further into my doubts, now I'm starting to say things like, well, science disproves the Bible, right? And so my doubts have now informed an attitude of pride, and now I have a position against God's truth, and I'm holding it against Him, and I'm still doubting, right? But it's the tone of it has changed because it's brought this pride in. You see what I'm saying there? So doubt is never, as with probably all of our attitudinal sins, like it brings along other sins with it. Okay. Doubt also partners with bitterness. Okay. God let X happen. God let COVID-19 happen in our world. I can't really trust him. I don't know that he's really good. I don't know that he's truly who he says he is. And now bitterness has started to set in. And now doubt is coming along with this and progressing me along that kind of path if I don't address that, right? And again, doubt and fear have this relationship where, fear can be a healthy thing. But when it comes to the fact of saying things like, gosh, I don't even know if God's in control of this world anymore, right? I don't understand how God can let things like this happen. Now doubt is bringing an unhealthy fear, and it's becoming this complex heart issue that I'm wrestling through. Do you guys see how that works? Right? And so you could combine it with a lot of different sin things that we struggle with in our hearts, but at any stage in this, when we realize, man, I've not been believing in God the way I should have, I'm still going to ask his forgiveness. I'm still going to acknowledge that was a sinful way of thinking. And ask him to work through that with me. By the way, the first question that Satan asks Eve in the garden is a doubt question, right? It's, did God really say, right? That's the first thing that Satan says to Eve. And so the first temptation is rooted in doubt of God's character. It's not about the apple, right? Okay. The apple is a secondary thing. Rather, Satan is saying, God didn't really promise you these things, or God is withholding something good from you. And all of a sudden there's doubt, right? And so doubt starts from this position of disbelief, not from a place of belief. And Satan tempts them to doubt God's character with that. But again, the whole point of this is to raise the question that God is really, truly merciful, truly gracious to people who recognize, I need help, right? I'm doubting. I don't quite understand. But instead of withdrawing from God, instead of internalizing my doubts and my fears and just, stewing in them, I'm giving them to the Lord. I'm saying, Lord, I'm going to choose to trust you, even though my eyes can't see what it is that you're doing. Does that all make sense to you guys? You guys tracking with me on that? Okay. So let's look at an example, because we actually are doing a Bible study, so we should look at the Bible. So turn to Matthew 11 with me. Let's look at an example in the last 15 minutes that we have here. Matthew 11, verse 1. This is a section that I feel like is, we don't always talk a ton about. It's easier to skip over this section and hit the big parables and stuff that Jesus is teaching in the Gospel of Matthew, but this is an important section. So Matthew 11, I'm going to read just the first 6 verses, and then we'll kind of take them apart a little bit. So Matthew 11:1 says, when Jesus had finished instructing his 12 disciples, he went on from there to teach and preach in their cities. Now when John, this is John the Baptist, as your topic heading will tell you, when he heard in prison about the deeds of Christ, he sent word by his disciples and said to him, are you the one who is to come, or shall we look for another? Okay, so just pause there for a second. What is the question being asked here?
Are you really the one, or should I keep looking?
Yeah, right. Are you really the Messiah? Okay, is the question being asked. Now, one more question, and then we'll read the rest of this. What was John the Baptist's mission? What was he called to do?
To prepare the way for Jesus to come.
Yeah, to prepare the way for Jesus to come on the basis that he's the Messiah, right? This is a prophesied role that John will fulfill from multiple places in the Old Testament, all right? And John comes and he does this. He baptizes Jesus. And now just, 6 chapters later, okay, he's in a position of some pretty severe doubt, it looks like, right? Are you the one, or am I supposed to be looking for someone else? Okay. And so Jesus answers him in verse 4. Well, he answers the messengers that come on behalf of John, who's in prison. He says, go and tell John what you hear and see. So there's an evidence here. Okay. Verse 5, the blind receive their sight and the lame walk, lepers are cleansed and the deaf hear, and the dead are raised up, and the poor have good news preached to them. And blessed is the one who is not offended by me. Okay, so John's in prison because he spoke out against another one of the, if you guys were with us on Thursday night, we talked about the Herodian dynasty, the Herods that are all different kings over Israel at different periods of time. And one of the other Herods in this list I referenced a little bit on Thursday, he's actually taken the wife of his brother. There's really strange things happening in this family, okay? And John was like, dude, that's wrong. You shouldn't do that, okay? And so that Herod was like, well, you can't say that because I am the king of this region. And so he puts John in jail, okay? So John's got one of those, circumstantial moments, okay, where the situation that he thought he was going to be in is not matching the situation that he's actually in, right? So he's already kind of in a position where doubt could already start to creep in, okay? And now, what's happening here is he's actually thinking back to prophecies like, Isaiah 61 and Isaiah 40, where, there's all these things about what the Messiah is going to come and do. And he's not seeing what was prophesied in the way that Jesus is conducting his ministry. All right. And so he's like, listen, are you the one? Are you really truly this Messiah? When he preached in Matthew chapter 3 that there would be this baptism of fire, he actually uses that language. These words came out of John the Baptist's mouth, right? That would come with the anointed one, the Messiah coming. And he's not seen that happen. Now it's like, well, is this really true? Is this really what God has called me to do? Is this really the Messiah? Okay. And so John may have been genuinely asking, if you were the king and I'm your ambassador, why am I in prison, right? And why is opposition to your ministry growing, okay? Because that's what he would have been seeing at this point, okay? And he'd done the right thing by speaking out against Herod's sinfulness, and he's suffering for it. And, I don't know if you've ever been in that position where you've spoken out against something that you knew was wrong, or spoken truth, to try to encourage somebody and just been, totally judged for it, or rejected for it. I mean, that is incredibly discouraging because, we want the truth of God to prevail. And we believe that one day it ultimately will, but we don't always see it in front of us right now, and so that's where John is. So what is Jesus, how does he respond to John's doubts? Like, what does he tell the disciples to report back to John? What does he say starting in verse 4? What's the message?
Miracles are happening.
Miracles are happening. Yeah. Okay. That, by the way, isn't just an arbitrary list of miracles. He's also citing Old Testament prophecy. These are things that the Old Testament said the Messiah would do when he would come. Heal the blind, make the lame walk, cleanse lepers, and raise the dead. These are all prophecies of the Old Testament. So Jesus is saying, look, it's not happening exactly how you thought, but here's the evidence, right? And you've maybe not seen it with your own eyes, but other people have. Okay. Is he rebuking John? Verse 6 to me sounds like it could be, blessed is the one who is not offended by me. You could read it that way, right? Like John, my disciples, they believe in me, which they're not quite there yet. Okay. But John, it would be better if you weren't offended by what I'm doing. Right. It's a mild rebuke. If it's a rebuke, Jesus is not in the business of backhanded criticism. Okay. But rather, he's, and by the way, he's not chastising John for asking questions either. He answers the questions, doesn't he? Like John asks for verification and Jesus is like, here it is, right? Look and see, and he's reminding him, though, we don't get a direct citation. Isaiah 61:3 says this, but he's quoting a passage of scripture that John would have been familiar with. And so, he asks, he doesn't chastise him or criticize him for asking the question. And actually, we're not going to read this today, but later on this, right from verses 7 on, he's actually going to hold up John the Baptist to the crowds who are with him as an example, right, of faith and of, fulfilling God's plan and being open to what God is doing. So he can't be, throwing John down and throwing him under the bus. Like, that's not what he's doing here. However, what he is saying is, those who truly place their confidence in Christ, they don't have a reason to be ashamed for what they believe. Okay. Though our trust will be tested, it's never going to prove to be misplaced. Okay. Trust can be tested, but it's not going to prove to be misplaced. Ultimately, our hope will hold secure. And so Jesus confirms his identity as Christ by demonstrating, look, here's the miraculous works that I'm doing. These are things specifically associated with the Messiah, and only the Messiah is going to fully do these things. Okay. So I think, well, let me ask you this question, then I'll give you two keys to hold on to for wrestling with doubt. Was John going through a season of doubt, or was he becoming a doubter? What do you guys think? Are these the earmarks of someone who is on a bad trajectory, or is this someone who's just having a moment?
I think John is just like having a moment of doubt.
Yeah, why do you say that?
Because like right now, like one, he's in jail.
Uh-huh.
But like later on, like as you continue reading, he I don't know. He moves on from doubting.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah. So in a way, I'm asking you an unfair question because I didn't read you the whole story, right?
yeah, just a little bit.
Yeah, no, he's totally gonna, he's gonna, even in jail, be a powerful testimony, and to the point where it's sort of like not anything he does in and of himself, but like he's going to be executed while he's in jail, and it's not because he's gone back on what he said. It's because the Herod decides to have this party and please his his sister-in-law and his sister wife and weird stuff, right? So like John is faithful even to the end. Okay, so I mean, part of this is he's going to go back to trusting, right? He's definitely having a weak moment here, but is not going to give up hope. And I'd also point out that what he does is important in the text, because he doesn't turn away from Jesus. He turns to him, doesn't he? Right? What does he do but send messengers? He can't go himself because he's locked up, but he goes to Jesus in the way that he can. Please tell me, what's going on here, right? And so I think that should be a cue for us too, that when we have doubts, when we have things that we are wrestling with, the challenge is are we going to the Lord with them? Are we trusting God with them? Are we asking him for help with them? Versus, I'm just reading this commentary over here because that's going to answer all my questions. Or I'm just talking to that person because they share my viewpoint on this, or I'm not talking to anybody about it. I'm just like turning this thing over and over in my head, and I can't come to, one way or the end of it. So turning to Christ is really important in this, because if we leave our doubts in our heart unchecked, it's going to cause us to turn inward versus outward. And we're going to isolate ourselves both from the Lord and from the community of faith too. You guys probably are familiar with this idea, but we are always going to be drawn to people that think like we think, right? And when it comes to the church, what's beautiful about the church is that we are able to come together in unity even when we don't share the same viewpoint about certain things. But there's something greater than our viewpoint that's drawing us together, and that's Christ. However, when we are doubting, when we are sort of trending in that trajectory of like, I'm not really sure if I believe this anymore, you will find somebody else who shares that belief, and they will help confirm you in that belief, right? They will sort of push you, help you, sort of take that step away from faith. And that's a scary place to be, you guys, right? That we would surrender something that we know to be true, or not hold it tightly, and put ourselves in a very spiritually vulnerable position, right? Whereas there is safety in the Church of God, because we will be honest with one another. We will evaluate the hardships of life, the tensions of theology, the things that we even disagree on together, unified in who Jesus is. So we don't want to turn inward with our doubts. We want to turn outward, and to people that we can spiritually trust. So let me give you two quick keys. We'll kind of wrap up with this, but you guys give me some thoughts on these, if you will. So key number one is remembering what Jesus has done and promised us can be a huge way to overcome doubt. Okay, remembering who Jesus is and what he has done and what he's promised can help us overcome our doubt. So we always need to be looking back at the same time as we're looking forward for answers. All right. One of the things that we, especially struggle with doubt is, I don't understand what God's doing right now. In my life right now, the circumstances that I'm experiencing, I don't see how they fit with, what the good promises that I know that God has for me. And so I need to look back and see, well, how has God been faithful in the past? What has Jesus truly promised to do for me? How has he been faithful? And then begin to run the grid of my hopeful future through what the Bible says about those things. So I have to remember what Jesus has done and what he's promised in order to overcome doubt. And with that, guys, I have to look only to Christ, right, for the strength to overcome the skepticism in my heart. Other people, again, they will tell me what I want to hear, essentially, or I will seek until I find somebody who says something that I like versus, well, what does the truth of God's word actually say? So the other key to overcoming doubt is looking to Christ for strength, looking to the word for strength versus just looking to other people for strength. Certainly not saying that we shouldn't share. We don't want to, as I'm saying, we don't want to withdraw and just isolate ourselves with our doubts and our suspicions. But we need to ask the right people for help too. We don't want to just ask people that are going to tell us what we want to hear. Does that make sense to you guys? I'm not telling you who you can and cannot talk to, but you guys know the friends and the people that will just say what you want to hear, versus somebody who's actually going to try to share with you spiritual wisdom and help you understand what God might be trying to teach you through whatever it is that you're doubting. Thoughts on those things? Questions? Again, I'll just reaffirm, though as a Christian, our trust will be tested because we live in a fallen world and sin is all around us and catastrophe and sickness and all kinds of stuff, right? Though our trust might be tested, it's never going to prove to have been misplaced, all right? Christ is the hope that we have. He's the hope of glory. Paul, for that reason, is saying things like, I'm not ashamed of the gospel, right? For it's the power of Christ for salvation to everyone who believes. And so while we are walking with faith this side of heaven, ultimately we have a faith and a hope that is a sure confidence that Christ has done what he said he was going to do, and that he's going to finish that work, and we will stand with him for all eternity. So that's the hope that we have. That's the reality that we believe in as Christians. And that's where we want to find the answers for the things that we struggle with in this life. All right. So we will talk about another D next week as we go through this. I will be happy to share notes with you guys if you would like them. Just if you have questions or comments that you didn't think of right at this moment, if you feel free to send them to us. But otherwise, I'll close us in prayer, and then I'll let you guys get back to whatever else you have to do for homework the rest of the day.